Let's get straight to the point. What you did last night wasn't just a casual encounter. It was something more, something that left a mark, a feeling you can't shake off. Because even though you try to convince yourself that it was just a fleeting moment, that it meant nothing deep in your mind, there's something telling you otherwise. And it's not about morality. It's not because society tells you that you should feel a certain way. It's because your own psychology is playing tricks on you. The human brain is not designed for detachment. You can try to rationalize it. You can try to pretend there are no emotions involved. But here's the brutal reality. Every time you have intimacy with someone, there's a connection that goes beyond the physical dot. Maybe right now you don't realize it. Maybe you feel indifferent, sure that you're one of those people who can separate pleasure from emotion. But what happens when, days later, their scent is still on your skin? When their voice echoes in your head? When, without realizing it, you compare everything to what you did with them? We call it no strings attached, but your brain sees it differently. Because here comes the part no one tells you. You're not immune to the chemistry of your own body. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, those little invisible demons that get triggered the moment you touch someone are the poison and the cure. The trap we all fall into. Have you ever wondered why some people stay stuck in relationships that destroy them? Why after certain encounters you feel empty instead of satisfied? Why sometimes, instead of feeling pleasure, you end up feeling a void? Here's the answer. Every time you physically give yourself to someone, you're not just sharing your body, you're sharing your energy. And that energy doesn't disappear when the night is over. It stays with you. Sometimes it stays as a pleasant memory. Other times, like a ghost whispering in the dark. Science has already proven it. The brain links sex with attachment, trust, and the feeling of security. But what happens if that bond is broken over and over again? If you get used to connecting and disconnecting without processing it, what do you think happens? What happens is that you fragment. What happens is that every encounter you think is harmless leaves a small mark, maybe imperceptible at first. But over time those marks accumulate, and one day you wake up and don't know why you feel empty. You don't know why, after so much pleasure, all there is more dissatisfaction. You don't know why you keep searching for something you never find. The truth is that intimacy is more than flesh and bone. It's more than skin on skin. It's an exchange, a fusion of who you are with who the other person is. And if you don't understand that, if you don't respect it, you end up losing yourself in the idea that you can play with fire without getting burned. But let me tell you something. There's always a price, and that price isn't immediate. You don't see it coming. It filters into your mind little by little, maybe in the form of distrust, maybe as emptiness, maybe in that strange feeling that something is missing, that something inside of you is crumbling. So tell me, how much of you have you left in other people's hands without realizing it? How much of your essence has been diluted in nights that promised much but left little? How many times have you confused desire with meaning, attraction with connection? Think about it before you say that intimacy doesn't leave a mark, because I assure you it does. And the more you ignore it, the bigger the shadow it will leave on you. But of course, that's not what you've been told. They've made you believe that sex is just that, a physical act with no major consequences, something you can do and undo without anything changing inside of you, something you can share with anyone, anytime, without anything in your psyche being altered. And though the idea sounds liberating, it's also a perfectly disguised lie. Because here's the brutal truth. Sex is never just physical. It never has been. It's a bridge, a direct access to the most primitive and vulnerable corners of the human mind. And do you know the danger of this? Once you cross that bridge, you can't go back without leaving something behind. Think about it. Every intimate encounter is more than a fleeting experience. It's a sort of silent contract. No matter how much you rationalize it, no matter how many times you repeat to yourself that it was just for fun, your subconscious doesn't understand verbal agreements. Your subconscious doesn't negotiate. It doesn't separate the physical from the emotional. It doesn't distinguish between pleasure and attachment. The only thing it knows is that it shared a moment of maximum vulnerability with someone else. And every time you do that someone stays with you, even if in ways you can't see. Maybe that's why with some people, you feel an immediate connection after intimacy. Maybe that's why with others, you feel repulsed or empty. It's not random. It's your psyche interpreting what you've refused to admit, that the exchange of energy is real, that what you touch, what you feel, what you absorb from the other person gets embedded in you in ways you don't even understand. And this is what no one wants to tell you. No one warns you that every time you share your body, you share your essence. No one warns you that if you do it without consciousness, without intention, you can slowly start losing yourself. And the worst part is, you won't notice until it's too late. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been with someone, and afterward, you feel like something inside of you changed? Maybe an emptiness that wasn't there before. Maybe an inexplicable sadness. Maybe a feeling of detachment as if you left a piece of yourself somewhere, you'll never get it back. That's not coincidence. Because while pleasure is momentary, scars are permanent. Not physical scars, but emotional, psychological ones. You can't see them, but they're there. They accumulate with each fleeting connection, with each night you try to convince yourself doesn't matter. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize that you've given so much of yourself to so many that you no longer know who you are without them. Here comes the truly terrifying part. The way you experience intimacy today defines how you'll view relationships for the rest of your life. Every experience leaves a mark on the way you love, on the way you trust, on the way you give yourself. And if you keep giving yourself away without understanding the weight of what you're doing, without recognizing the invisible consequences, you'll become numb. You'll become incapable of feeling what you once felt. Maybe it's already happened to you. Maybe you've already experienced that emotional numbness. Maybe you've already found yourself in situations where you should have felt something, but you felt nothing. Where someone looked at you with affection, and instead of responding, you just felt indifference. Where physical contact no longer feels like a connection, but like a transaction. And here's the messed up part. The more you normalize this detachment, the harder it will be to go back. Because detachment doesn't activate overnight. It installs itself slowly, like a poison that builds up in such tiny doses that you don't even realize it's killing something inside of you until one day, all that's left is an emptiness that no one can fill. Think about it. How many times have you tried to fill that emptiness with more of the same? How many times have you thought the answer is more encounters, more experiences, more distractions? But the curious thing about emptiness is that it can never be filled from the outside. And the curious thing about empty intimacy is that the more you search for it, the bigger the hole becomes. But of course, it's easier to ignore it. It's easier to convince yourself that everything's fine, that you've got it under control, that you're immune, that none of this applies to you. But tell me something. If all of this were a lie, why do you keep searching for more? Why, after everything, is there still a silent yearning deep inside of you? The human being is not made for detachment. We weren't designed to exchange bodies without exchanging souls. And though the modern world tells you otherwise, though culture repeats to you that you can have it all without paying a price, the reality is different. There's always a cost. And if you don't see it now, you will later in the way you relate to others, in the way you trust, in the way you love, or in the way, little by little, you stop doing it. So tell me, how many more times will you ignore it? How much more will you sacrifice before you realize that the real problem isn't what you're doing, but what that's doing to you? The question you should be asking yourself isn't how many more times you'll ignore it, but how far you're willing to keep paying a price you haven't even calculated. Because here's the key, none of this is free. Everything leaves a bill, even if you don't see it now. And the worst part is, the longer you take to realize it, the higher that bill becomes. Think about it. If intimacy were really insignificant, if it were truly just a game with no consequences, why is it so hard to let go of certain people? Why do some encounters leave such a deep mark that even when you want to, you can't forget them? It's not coincidence. It's not just a whim of the mind. It's because intimacy creates invisible bonds that don't break with time, distance, or forgetting. Bonds that, if you don't manage them consciously, end up becoming shackles. And here's the messed up part. You can't choose who you connect with on this level. Your brain does it for you. Your subconscious, your emotions, your body conspire to create a connection that goes beyond what you think you control. That's why sometimes you end up getting attached to people who aren't good for you. That's why you keep thinking about someone who's no longer there. Why, even though you swear it meant nothing, something in you keeps returning to that feeling. And the more you ignore it, the more it will control you, because the human mind is a battlefield. Every experience is a shot. Every relationship leaves scars. Every night you try to treat as a simple moment becomes a file stored deep in your memory. And no matter how much you try to pretend it's not there, in the moments of silence, on lonely days, on nights when nothing distracts you, you feel it. You feel the weight of all those unfinished connections, all those encounters that, even though you try to treat as insignificant, left a mark. You feel the fragmentation of a part of you that you gave away without realizing it. And here's where the biggest trap lies. The problem isn't just what you've given, but what you've lost in the process. Every time you share your body, without intention, without consciousness, without true connection, something inside of you gets used to superficiality. And when that happens, when you normalize detachment, when you train your brain to see intimacy as a simple act, without value, you start losing the ability to feel anything real. And that's the real danger. Not that it will hurt, not that it will affect you, but that one day it won't. One day, you'll look into someone's eyes and feel nothing. One day, physical contact will no longer mean anything to you. One day, you'll find yourself surrounded by people, with options, with possibilities, but completely empty inside. Because when you normalize detachment, you become immune to love, not by choice, but by habit. And the more you get used to this, the harder it will be to go back. So, I ask you, how far are you willing to keep ignoring this? How much longer will you keep playing a game where the only piece that really matters is you? Think about this before you move forward, before it's too late, before one day you look back and realize you lost everything, and you don't even know when it happened. If you've made it this far, I want you to do something. Leave a comment with the phrase, "The true price of intimacy can't be seen, it's felt." I want to know how many of you really understand this. How many of you have felt this truth in your own skin? And if this resonates with you, subscribe, not because I say so, but because here we talk about things that no one else dares to say. And trust me, this is just the beginning. See you in the next video.